Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 17 of our reading of The Princess Bride by William Goldman, a hot fairy tale, and we are going to go over the copyright information, which should be on the screen now. And let's go take a look at it. I need to find the book first. It says copyright 1973 by William Goldman, all rights reserved, published in the United States by Ballantine Books, a division of Random House Incorporated, New York, and simultaneously in Canada by Ballantine Books of Canada, Limited, Toronto, Canada, Library of Congress. That gives all the information here. This looks like it's the fourth printing. It's published in, it's manufactured in the United States. And the cover art is by Norman Green. So, anyways, in the last part, Buttercup had a dream that she had dropped her love and thrown it away, and that she'd become the princess of trash and stuff like that. And she realized that was just a dream. It's still 60 days until her wedding, and the author, William Goldman, was relaying his own feelings about that realization. So, anyways, we're going to continue where we left off. He was talking to another writer named Edith that he lived nearby or something. Okay. But it meant so much to me to have it said and out and free and flying. That was the discontent I endured the night my father stopped reading. I realized right then that was the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. And that's why I think this, and that's what I think this book's about. All those Columbia experts can spiel all they want about the delicious satire. They're crazy. This book says life isn't fair, and I'm telling you, one and all, you better believe it. I got a fat, spoiled son. He's not going to nab Miss Rheingold, and he's always going to be fat, even if he gets skinny. He'll still be fat, and he'll still be spoiled, and life will never be enough to make him happy. And that's my fault, maybe. Make it all my fault if you want. The point is that we're not created equal. For the rich, they sing, life isn't fair. I got a cold wife. She's brilliant. She's stimulating. She's terrific. There's no love. That's okay, too. Just so long as we don't keep expecting everything to somehow even out for us before we die. Look, grown-ups skip this paragraph. I'm not about to tell you this book has a tragic ending. I already said in the very first line how it was my favorite in all the world, but there's a lot of bad stuff coming up. Torture, you've already been prepared for, and there's worse. There's death coming up, and you better understand this. Some of the wrong people die. Be ready for it. This isn't Curious George uses the potty. No one warned me, and it was my own fault. You'll see what I mean in a little. And that was my mistake, so I'm not letting it happen to you. The wrong people die, some of them, and the reason is this. Life is not fair. Forget all the garbage your parents put out. Remember Morgenstern. You'll be a lot happier. Okay, enough. Back to the next nightmare time. The next night, she dreamed of giving birth to their first child, and it was a girl, a beautiful little girl, and Buttercup said, I'm sorry, it wasn't a boy. I know you need an heir. And Humperdinck said, Beloved sweet, don't concern yourself with that. Just look at the glorious child God has given us. And then he left, and Buttercup held the child to her perfect breast, and the child said, Your milk is sour. And Buttercup said, Oh, I'm sorry. And she shifted the infant to the other breast, and the child said, No, this is sour too. And Buttercup said, I don't know what to do. And the baby said, You always know what to do, and always know exactly what to do. You always do exactly what's right for you, and the rest of the world can go hang. But Buttercup said, You mean Wesley? And the baby said, Of course I mean Wesley. And Buttercup explained patiently, I thought he was dead, you see. I'd given my word to your father. And the baby said, I'm dying now. There's no love in your milk. Your milk has killed me. And then the child stiffened and cracked and turned and turned in Buttercup's hand to nothing but dry dust. And Buttercup screamed and screamed, even when she was awake again. With 59 days left to go till her marriage, she was still screaming. The third nightmare came quickly and followed the following evening, and again it was a baby, this time a son, a marvelous strong boy. And Humperdinck said, "Beloved, it's a boy." And Buttercup said, "I didn't fail you, thank heavens." And then he was gone, and Buttercup called out, "May I see my son now?" And all the doctors scurried around outside her royal room, but the boy was not brought in. What seems to be the trouble? But Buttercup called out, and the chief doctor said, "I don't quite understand, but he doesn't want to see you." And Buttercup said, "Tell him I am his mother, and that I am the queen, and I command his presence." And then he was there, just as handsome a baby boy as anyone could wish for. "Close it," Buttercup said, and the doctors closed the door. The baby stood in the corner as far from her bed as he could. "Come here, darling," Buttercup said. "Why, are you going to kill me too?" "I'm your mother, and I love you. Now come here." "I'll never kill anybody. You killed Wesley. Did you see his face in the fire swamp when you walked away and left him? That's what I call killing. When you're older, you'll understand things. Now, I'm not going to tell you again. Come here, murderer." The baby shouted, "Murderer, murderer." But by then she was out of bed, and she had him in her arms and was saying, "Stop that. Stop it. You stop it this instant. I love you." And he said, "Your love is poison. It kills." And he died in her arms, and she started to cry. Even when she was awake again, with 58 days to go until her marriage, she was still crying. The next night, she simply refused to go to sleep. Instead, she walked and read and did needlework and drank cup after cup of steaming tea from the Indies. She felt sick with weariness, of course, but such was her fear of what she might dream that she preferred any waking discomfort to whatever sleep might have to offer. And at dawn, her mother was pregnant. No more than pregnant, her mother was having a baby, and as Buttercup stood there in the corner of the room, she watched herself being born, and her father gasped at her beauty, and so did her mother. And the midwife was the first to show concern. The midwife was a sweet woman, known throughout the village for her love of babies. And she said, "Look, trouble." And the father said, What trouble? Where before did you ever see such beauty?" And the midwife said, "Don't you understand why she was given such beauty? It's because she has no heart. Here, listen, the baby is alive, but there is no heart." And she held Buttercup's chest against the father's ear, and the father could only nod and say, "We must find a miracle man to place a heart inside." But the midwife said, "That would be wrong, I think. I've heard before of creatures like this, the heartless ones, and as they grow bigger and get more and more beautiful, and behind them is nothing but broken bodies and shattered souls, and these without hearts are anguished bringers. And my advice would be, since you're both still young, to have another child, a different child, and be rid of this one now. But, of course, the final decision is up to you." And the father said to the mother, "Well?" And the mother said, "Since the midwife is the kindest person in the village, she must know a monster when she sees one. Well, let's get to it." So Buttercup's father and Buttercup's mother put their hands on the baby's throat, and the baby began to gasp. Even when Buttercup was awake again at dawn, with 57 days to go till her marriage, she could not stop gasping. From then on, the nightmares became simply too frightening. When there were 50 days to go, Buttercup knocked one night on the door of Prince Humperdinck's chamber. She entered when he bid her to. "I see trouble," he said. "You look very ill." And so she did. Beautiful, of course, still that, but in no way well. Buttercup did not see quite how to begin. He ushered her into a chair. He got her water. She sipped at it, stared dead ahead. He put the glass to one side. "At your convenience, princess," he said. "It comes to this," Buttercup began. "In the fire swamp, I made the worst mistake in all the world. I love Wesley. I always have. It seems I always will. I did not know this when you came to me. Please believe what I am about to say. When you said that I must marry you or face death, I answered, kill me. I meant that. I mean this now, too. If you say I must marry you in 50 days, I will be dead by morning. The prince was literally stunned. After a long moment, he knelt by Buttercup's chair and, in his gentlest voice, started to speak. I admit that when we first became engaged, there was to be no love involved. That was as much my choice as yours, though the notion may have come from you, but simply you must have noticed in this last month of parties and festivities a certain warming of my attitude. You have been both sweet and noble. Thank you. Having said that, I hope you appreciate how difficult this next sentence is for me to say. I would die myself rather than cause you unhappiness by standing in the way of you marrying the man you love. Buttercup wanted almost to weep with gratitude. She said, I will bless you all my days for your kindness. Then she stood. So it's settled. Our wedding is off. He stood too, except for perhaps one thing. That being, have you considered that the possibility that he might not know what that he may not now want? Oh. Have you considered the possibility that he may not now want any longer to marry you? Until that moment, she had not. You were, I hate to remind you, not altogether gentle with his emotions in the fire swamp. Forgive me for saying that, beloved, but you did leave him in the lurch, in a manner of speaking. Buttercup sat down hard, her turn now to be stunned. Humperdinck knelt again beside her. This Wesley of yours, this sailor boy, he has pride, Buttercup managed to whisper. More than any man alive, I sometimes think. Well considered, then, dearest. Here he is, off sailing somewhere with the dread pirate Roberts. He has had a month to survive the emotional scars you dealt him. What if he wants now to remain single? Or worse, what if he finds another? Buttercup was now even beyond whispering. I think, sweetest child, that we should strike a bargain, you and I. If Wesley wants to marry you still, bless you both. If for reasons unpleasant to mention, his pride will not let him, then you will marry me, as planned, and be Queen of Florin. He couldn't be married, I'm sure, not my Wesley. She looked at the prince. But how can I find out? What about this? You write him a letter, tell him everything. We'll make 4 copies. I'll take my 4 fastest ships and order them off in all directions. The dread pirate Roberts is not often more than a month's sail from Florin. Whichever of my ships finds him will run the white flag of truce, deliver your letter, and Wesley can decide. If no, he can speak that message to my captain. If yes, my captain will sail him here to you, and I will have to content myself somehow with a lesser bride. I'm not sure, but I definitely think that this is the most generous decision I have yet heard. Do me a favor, then, in return. Until we know Wesley's intentions, one way or another, let us continue as we have, so the festivities will not be halted. And if I seem too fond of you, remember that I cannot help myself. Agreed, Buttercup said, going to the door, but not before she kissed his cheek. He followed her. Off with you now, and write your letter. And he returned the kiss, smiling with his eyes at her until the corridor curved her from his sight. There was no doubt whatsoever in his mind that he was going to seem too fond of her in the days ahead. Because when she died of murder on their wedding night, it was crucial that all Florin realized the depth of his love. The epical size of his loss, since then no one would dare hesitate to follow him in the revenge war he was to launch against Gilder. At first, when he hired the Sicilian, he was convinced it was best that someone else do her in, all the while making it appear the work of soldiers from Gilder. And when the man in black had somehow materialized to spoil his plan, the prince came close to going insane with rage. But now he basically his basic optimistic nature had reasserted itself. Everything always worked out for the best. The people were infatuated with Buttercup now as they had never been before her kidnapping, and when he announced from his castle balcony that she had been murdered, he already saw the scene in his mind. He would arrive just too late to save her from strangling, but soon enough to see the Guelderian soldiers leaping from the window of his bedroom to the soft ground below. When he made that speech to the masses on the 500th anniversary of his country, well, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the square, and although he was just the least bit perturbed, since he had never actually killed a woman before with his bare hands, there was a first time for everything. Besides, if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. That night they began to torture Wesley. Count Rugen did the actual pain-inducing. The prince simply sat by, asking questions out loud, inwardly admiring the count's skill. The count really cared about pain. The whys behind the screams interested him fully as much as the anguish itself, and whereas the prince spent his life in physically following the hunt, Count Rugen read and studied anything he could get his hands on dealing with the subject of distress. All right now, the prince said to Wesley, who lay in the great fifth-level cage. Before he began, I want you to answer me this. Have you any complaints about your treatment this far? None whatsoever, Wesley replied, and in truth, he had none. Oh, he might have preferred being unchained a bit now and then, but if you were to be in captivity, or if you were to be a captive, you couldn't ask for more than he had been given. The albino's medical ministrations had been precise, and his shoulder was fine again. The food the albino brought him had always been hot and nourishing, the wine and brandy wonderfully warming against the dankness of the underground cage. You feel fit then, the prince went on. I assume my legs are a little stiff from being chained, but other than that, yes, good. Then I promise you this, as God himself is my witness, answer the next question and I will set you free this night. But you must answer it honestly, fully, withholding nothing. If you lie, I will know, and then I'll loose the count on you. I have nothing to hide, Wesley said. Ask away. Who hired you to kidnap the princess? It was someone from Gilder. We found fabric indicating as much on the princess's horse. Tell me that man's name and you are free to speak. No one hired me, Wesley said. I was working strictly freelance, and I didn't kidnap her. I saved her from others who were doing that very thing. You seem a reasonable fellow, said, and my princess claims to have known you many years, so I will give you on her account one last final chance. The name of the man in Gilder who hired you. Tell me, or face torture. No one hired me, I swear. The count set fire to Wesley's hands. Nothing permanent or disabling. He just dipped Wesley's hands in oil and brought a candle close enough to set things bubbling. When Wesley had screamed, "No one, no one, no one," on my life, a sufficient number of times, the count dipped Wesley's hands in water, and he and the prince left via the underground entrance, leaving the medication to the albino, who was always nearby during the torturing times, but never visible enough to be distracting. I feel quite invigorated, the count said, as he and the prince began to ascend the underground staircase. It's a perfect question. He was telling the truth, clearly. We both know that. The prince nodded. The count was privy to all his innermost plans for the revenge war. I'm fascinated to see what happens, the count went on. Which pain will be the least endurable, the physical or the mental anguish of having freedom offered if the truth is told, then telling it and being thought a liar? I think the physical, said the prince. I think you're wrong, said the count. Actually, they were both wrong. Wesley suffered not at all throughout. His screaming was totally a performance to please them. He had been practicing his defenses for a month now, and he was more than ready. The minute the Count brought the candle close, Wesley raised his eyes to the ceiling, dropped his eyelids over them, and in a state of deep and steady concentration he took his brain away. Buttercup was what he thought of: her autumn hair, her perfect skin, and he brought her very close beside him, and had her whisper in his ear throughout the burning, "I love you, I love you. I only left you in the fire swamp to test your love for me. It is as great as mine. Is it as great as mine for you? Can two such lovers exist on one planet at one time? If there is there that much room, beloved Wesley?" The albino bandaged his fingers. Wesley lay still. For the first time, the albino started things, whispering, "You better tell them." From Wesley, a shrug. Whispered, "They never stop, not once. They start, tell them what they want to know, and have done with it." Shrug whispers, "The machine is nearly ready. They are testing it on animals now." Shrug, "It's for your own good. I tell you these things." "My own good? What good? They're going to kill me anyways." From the albino, a nod. The prince found Buttercup waiting unhappily outside his chamber door. It's my letter," she began. "I cannot make it right." Come in," the prince said gently. "Maybe we can help you." She sat down in the same chair as before. "All right, I'll close my eyes and listen. Read it to me." Wesley, my passion, my sweet, my only, my own, come back, I shall kill myself otherwise. Yours in torment, Buttercup. She looked at Humperdinck. "Well, do you think I'm throwing myself at him?" "It does seem a bit forward," the prince admitted. "It doesn't leave him a great deal of room to maneuver. Will you help me improve it, please?" "I'll do what I can, sweet lady, but first, it might help if you knew just a bit about him. It is really so wonderful." Is he really so wonderful, this Wesley of yours?" "Not so much wonderful as perfect," she replied. Kind of flawless. More or less magnificent, without blemish, rather on the ideal side." She looked at the prince. "Am I being helpful? I think emotions are clouding your objectivity. Just a bit. Do you actually think that there is nothing the fellow can't do?" Buttercup thought for a while. "It's not so much that there's nothing he can't do. It's more that he can do it all better than anybody else can do it." The prince chuckled and smiled. "In other words, for example, you mean if he wanted to hunt, he could out-hunt, again, for example, someone such as myself?" "Oh, I would think if he wanted to, he could quite easily, but he happens not to like hunting, at least to my knowledge. Though maybe he does, I don't know. I never knew he was so interested in mountain climbing, but he scaled the cliffs of insanity under most adverse conditions, and everyone agrees that that is not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish." "Well, why don't we just begin our letter with 'Divine Wesley,' and appeal to his sense of modesty," the prince suggested. Buttercup began to write and stopped. "Does divine begin D-E or D-I?" "D-I, I believe." "Amazing creature," the prince replied, smiling gently as Buttercup commenced the letter. "They composed it in 4 hours, and many times she said, 'I could never get through this without you.' And the prince was always most modest, asking little helpful personal questions about Wesley, as often as was possible without drawing attention to it. And in this way, well before dawn, she told him, smiling, as she remembered of Wesley's early fears of spinning ticks. And that night, in the fifth cage, the prince asked if he was And that night, in the fifth level cage, the prince asked, as he was to always ask, "Tell me the name of the man in Gilder who hired you to kidnap the princess." and I promise you immediate freedom. And Wesley replied, as he was always to reply, no one, no one. I was alone, and the Count, who had spent the day getting the spinners ready, placed them carefully on Wesley's skin, and Wesley closed his eyes and begged and pleaded. And after an hour or so, the prince and the Count left. The albino remained behind with the chore of burning the spinners and then pulling them free from Wesley's fled. Leslie accidentally poisoned him. And on the way up the underground stairs to ground level, the prince said, just for conversation's sake, much better, don't you think? The count obviously said nothing, which was vaguely irritating to Humperdinck because, to tell the absolute truth, torture was never all that high on his scale of passions, and he would just as soon have disposed of Wesley right then. If only Buttercup would admit that he, Humperdinck, was the better man. But she would not. She simply would not. All she ever talked about was Wesley. All she ever asked about was news of Wesley. Days went by, weeks went by, party after party went by, and all Florin was moved by the spectacle of their great hunting prince, at last so clearly and wonderfully in love. And when they were alone, all she ever said was, I wonder where could Wesley be? What could be taking him so long? How can I live until he comes? We are going to stop this here. We have been reading from William Goldman's The Princess Bride, a hot fairy tale. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information is in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.